Gave my youngest son relationship advice, his brother's girlfriend overheard, leading her to break up with my eldest son. After the cake and presents, I sat down with my youngest son to chat. He's just turned into a young teenager, and after much thought, my wife and I decided he was old enough, and mature enough, to start dating. Naturally, he wanted advice about future relationships. It turns out, he's noticed something about the way his mother and I rarely ever fight. Apparently, it stood out enough for him to ask about it. We dove into the conversation, talking about learning to respect your partner, among other things. I wish I could remember every detail of what I said, but a few highlights stuck with me. I told him to always be ready, and willing, to say you're sorry, even when you think you're right. Never, ever dismiss your girlfriend's feelings, those are real and valid, whether or not you understand them. Communication is vital, that much I stressed. If something is bothering you and you don't bring it up, you're only hurting yourself. I explained how crucial it is to truly listen, even when you'd rather do anything else. It makes a difference. Put the game controller down, mute the TV, whenever she wants your attention, she should always know she matters. End every conversation with some sign of affection. If you won't see her for a few hours, give her a hug, a kiss, or both, every single time. Throughout the day, send a message or simply tell her you're thinking about her, that you care, or that you love her, and genuinely mean it. If the feeling fades, figure out why and fix it, or break it off. Trust is essential, too. Once it's broken, it may never be fully restored. I told him that while most people believe love is the foundation of a relationship, it's really respect. If either you don't respect your partner, or you feel she doesn't respect you, talk about it and try to fix it, or you'll both end up miserable. If it can't be fixed, let it go. There was plenty of laughter mixed in, too. I shared a gem from my own dad, advice that stuck with me: you'll know your girlfriend is completely comfortable around you when she's willing to fart in front of you. Don't marry her until that happens. Words to live by, if you ask me. While all this was happening, my youngest was perched at my desk, flipping through the video games he wanted to buy with his birthday money. My daughter and my oldest son's, now ex-girlfriend lounged on the couch, playing video games but clearly listening in. My daughter added her own advice here and there. She's been dating a few years herself, mostly about date etiquette and fun places to go. The girlfriend barely spoke, which, thinking back, should have been a warning. She's usually this lively, talkative, generous girl. Eventually my oldest swung by, delivering his gift for his little brother. He and his girlfriend hung around long enough to share in the cake, and then they left. Afterward, everything unraveled. I didn't know what exactly went down at first, but my daughter picked up some pieces from my oldest now ex-girlfriend. Later, my eldest came storming in, furious at me for ruining his relationship. Turns out, he hadn't been the boyfriend he should have been. His girlfriend confronted him about the issues they had. She felt he didn't respect her opinions or her feelings. She broke up with him. That's the whole story. I adore every one of my kids with all my heart, even when they're angry with me, and I have to admit, I messed up. I'm responsible for this breakup, but not because of what I said in front of his girlfriend. The real failure was never drilling that advice into my oldest son's head when he was younger. Update 1. I want to clarify a few things before diving into what's been happening with my family. My oldest son is a young adult. He doesn't live with us anymore. When I see him, it's usually brief, like the other day when he dropped off a birthday gift for his younger brother, grabbed some cake, and then left with his girlfriend. My daughter and my youngest are both still teenagers. My daughter remains friends with my oldest son's, now ex-girlfriend, even though their relationship ended. That's the context around here lately. After my oldest son and his girlfriend broke up, he erupted, directing a lot of that anger at me. Words flew, things that had been buried deep came to the surface, and secrets spilled out that I never saw coming. I let him cool off for a couple days. My wife tried to reach him by phone, but he kept dodging her calls. So, I decided to go to his apartment in person. His roommate must have seen how determined I was, because he managed to get my son to let me in. When we finally talked, it got heated. There was shouting, some yelling, we even hugged once, and in the midst of all that, the truth began to untangle itself. My son confessed to me that a few weeks back, he'd gotten a job offer out of state through an apprenticeship tied to his trade school. He's seriously considering it. That apprenticeship could practically double his hourly rate, and they'll even help pay for some of his time in classes, but the flip side is that living costs in that city are much higher. A lot of the stress between him and his girlfriend came down to this: she wanted him to stay close, near her family, but he was hoping she'd take the leap and join him if he accepted the apprenticeship. Some people have described my son as misogynistic, and though that stung, I started to wonder if it was, in part, true, and if some of that could have come from what he's seen in our home. When I talked with him about it, what surprised me was that he interpreted small things in my marriage in ways that I never intended. Take, for example, what my wife and I call my magic coffee cup. For as long as I can remember, I've never made my own coffee while she's home, not because I demand it, but because that's just the rhythm we fell into from the moment we started dating. My wife loves to refill my cup, waving her hands and casting silly fake spells, hocus pocus or bibbidi, bobbidi boo, grinning the whole time. Sometimes I'll pick up my own empty cup and try some magic myself, shaking it and whining, honey, my magic cup isn't working again. If I try to make my own coffee, she always bumps me out of the way, literally hip checks me aside, and does it herself. But my kids have only ever seen the outcome of this habit, not how it evolved as a playful part of our relationship over the years. My wife never has to do it. If she told me today that she'd rather I make my own coffee, I wouldn't hesitate. I'd kiss her and go make my own cup without protest. This coffee ritual is wrapped in another ongoing joke between us. We each have household chores the other isn't allowed to do, so we'll forget how, and can never live without each other. Officially, I'm in charge of all the laundry, and she's in charge of the dishes. In truth, we swap around sometimes, but we enjoy pretending otherwise. I learned to cook her favorites so she's forgotten how, just like she claims she can't make eggs over easy anymore, or that I don't remember how to make her favorite slop, a creamy sausage and noodle dish with fried onions, not healthy, but delicious beyond words. These quirks are the mosaic of our love language, and it's taken years of laughter, compromise, and a fair share of arguments to arrive at this place. My son had misunderstood all this. He saw only what looked like old-fashioned gender roles, not realizing that we arrived here through years of mutual negotiation, small battles, and shared inside jokes. He'd mistaken the end result of a deeply personal, evolving partnership for traditional, rigid male-female roles. While all this was happening, my wife and daughter were spending time with his ex-girlfriend. We all care about her, and it's hard to envision her no longer being part of our lives. In their talk, my wife and daughter unearthed what my son hadn't been telling me. He's been immersing himself in the nonsense spread by certain podcasters and social media influencers, people who spew blatantly misogynistic rhetoric. The tension over whether she'd move out of state with him was just the tip of the iceberg. When they discussed their futures, her dreams and his expectations clashed dramatically. He'd begun insisting that women should shoulder the brunt of housework, a view he'd never picked up from me, because in our household, things aren't nearly so black and white. Sure, dishes look like a lot of work, but laundry is more than tossing clothes into a machine and waiting it out. It's stripping linens, switching out towels and bathroom robes, swapping curtains, chores my kids rarely even notice, because I do them. My wife has only changed our bed a handful of times in recent years. Both laundry and dishes are endless monsters to battle. In a good marriage, you and your partner stand side by side against those monsters, however the work gets divvied up. It hurts to see my son and his girlfriend remain apart, but truthfully, he's got growing up to do before there's any hope of reconciliation. I nudged him to consider therapy, but I doubt he'll take me up on it. He's at that age where he believes he has it all figured out, and hasn't yet learned that wisdom comes from realizing how often we're wrong, even about ourselves. Everyone screws up. No matter how perfect we think we're living, sometimes our thinking needs a serious overhaul. Update 2. At 6:17 a.m. 2 days after my last post, my phone buzzed with a one-word text from my oldest: coffee? No emojis, no preamble, just that. I told him to pick the place. He sent me a pin for a diner that hasn't changed its menu since the Reagan administration. I got there early because that's what dads do when they're trying not to blow it. He walked in wearing the same hoodie he's had since high school, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping much, and he slid into the booth across from me with the graceless flop only young men and very old dogs can pull off. He didn't make me pull it out of him. He took the apprenticeship. They want him there in 3 weeks. He said it like he expected me to argue, or maybe congratulate him, or maybe hand him a map for his life with a neat little route drawn on it. I said I was proud and meant it. The waitress came by with coffee and a smile that said she'd seen every version of this conversation a dozen times. He ordered a mountain of eggs. I told him I'd help him move. He said he could handle it. I told him I'd help him move anyway. We danced around the topic of his ex for a while. He took cheap shots at city rent, at parking tickets, at the price of milk, then took a long swing at influencers like he realized mid-complaint that he sounded like them. It was like watching him step into a pothole in real time. He caught himself, looked up at me, and said, I was an idiot. I didn't leap in with relief. I asked him what being an idiot looked like, to him. He said, talking like I knew things I didn't, acting like the way you and mom joke is the Bible. Expecting her to be like a character, not a person. There it was. And it didn't make me want to lecture him, it made me want to hug him. I didn't. He's not a little kid anymore, and there are only so many hugs you can force on a young man in a public diner before he files a complaint with the health department. Instead, I said, it's easier to memorize a script than learn how to talk. He nodded like that hurt. The same afternoon my wife managed to lay open her thumb on that medieval torture device known as a mandolin. She did what every mother does when blood is spurting and lunch is burning, told me she was fine. I bundled her into the car and took her to urgent care, where a nurse with a calming voice and the patience of a saint put 3 neat stitches in and told her no dishes, no chopping, no scrubbing for a week. My wife smiled sweetly and asked if the nurse had any advice on how to disable a husband who thinks he knows his way around a dishwasher. The nurse grinned back and said, yes. Hide the pods. We all laughed, but for a week the my chore/your chore routine went out the window. I did the dishes. I did the chopping. I cooked and I washed, and I learned that our largest pan holds a grudge when you use the wrong sponge. Every time I pulled a rack out and the glasses clacked together, I muttered my own spells, bibbity bobbity blue dawn, and my wife rolled her eyes from the couch but still looked a little pleased. 2 days later my oldest showed up at our place unannounced with 2 grocery bags and a sheepish expression. He caught me elbow deep in suds. He stood there a minute, took in the scene, glanced at my wife's thumb bandage, and said, "The magic cup unionized?" I flicked a bubble at him. He helped me unload groceries without being asked, then sat with his mom for an hour while she showed him videos of our youngest trying to master a French omelette like he was auditioning for culinary school. It was easy in a way it hadn't been in a while. He still had edges, but he wasn't cutting us with them. Somewhere in there, my youngest asked me to drop him at the mall for his first date. He delivered this information like he was asking for a ride to a dentist appointment. I said okay and then sat on the second floor near a fake ficus for an extra 15 minutes, just in case something went sideways. He and the girl met under the neon sign of the arcade, and I had to look away from how wobbly my heart felt. Later, he told me he remembered to put down the controller whenever she wanted to talk, and he said it like he'd remembered to wear socks that matched and was proud of himself. He asked if he was texting too much. I told him if he has to ask, he should ask her. He stared at me and then said, "That's annoyingly good." He sent her a message right there, "Am I texting you too much?" Then he handed me his phone so I wouldn't see her reply and died dramatically on the living room carpet. She wrote back, "No. I like it." He pretended to be unaffected. He failed. Packing day for my oldest came faster than I expected. His roommate and 2 guys from his program showed up to help, all takeout boxes and profanity aimed lovingly at the U-Haul. I brought bungee cords and water and the kind of dad authority that only emerges when there's a rental truck involved. We argued about load distribution like we were planning a moon landing. One of his buddies, tattoos up both arms, a face like a choir boy, said, baffled, "Sir, how do all your straps have labels?" I told him I write on my straps because I'm not the man I was at 20 and I like to know which one bites me. They laughed. The laughter was good. It made the carrying lighter. On the way out of town, my son asked if we could make a stop that you're not going to like. He wanted to drop off a couple of things at his ex's place, library book that somehow had his name on the receipt, sweatshirt she claimed wasn't his but he swore was, the sort of artifacts that seem important and ridiculous in the same breath. I didn't want to be a part of it, but I also didn't want him to do it alone and then pretend it was nothing. I said I'd wait in the truck. Her dad opened the door before my son could knock twice. He's a big guy with a gentle face, a man in yard shoes and the kind of forearms that come from repairing your own dishwasher for 3 decades. He recognized me, which is a strange experience. You meet the fathers of the kids who date your kids and you feel like you're in some secret club you never intended to join. He invited me inside and I said I'd wait, but he had one of those voices that make refusal feel like theater. "Come in," he said. "I'm grilling. You can tell me I'm doing it all wrong." So I went in and stood near the sliding glass door and watched my son stand in a living room that wasn't his anymore. His ex came in with a towel around her wet hair and stopped dead. She was polite. She was kind. She was not 1 ounce more than that. She gave him back his hoodie, he gave her the book. They looked like 2 people who'd been actors in a play and suddenly couldn't remember their lines. He said he was sorry. He said it 3 ways, no fishing hooks hidden in any of them. He didn't suggest getting back together. He didn't barter. He told her she deserved respect and that he had not given it. She said she accepted his apology and that she'd always care about him, which is such a generous sentence when you think about it. Then she asked if they could keep some distance for a while. He nodded like that sentence cost him something. He left his key on her entry table without being asked. I shook her dad's hand and told him his grill smelled amazing. He said, "It's just sausages." He had the look of every dad who has ever watched his kid hurt and known there's no wrench in the garage for that job. We drove a long time without music, the road unspooled, and the sky did that late summer thing where it looks like an old photograph someone left in a sunny window. He finally said, "I wanted to fix it." I said, "Sometimes the fixing is letting go." He snorted, but he didn't argue. His new city greeted us with a gnarly tangle of highways and an apartment complex that had recently decided to call itself lofts even though it was just a decent place with small kitchens and nice sunlight. We hauled boxes up 3 flights because the elevator had a sign taped to it that said temporarily out of order in a font only landlords buy. His new shop is a 10-minute bus ride away, and he wanted to show me. We went. His foreman met us at the door, a woman in her 40s with a jawline that could cut through pipe and eyes that missed nothing. Her name was Carla. She shook his hand, then shook mine. I watched him recalibrate in real time. She gave him a tour that was secretly a series of tests, and he failed 2 of them and she made him laugh about it. When we left, he said, "I like her." I said, "Yeah. You'd better." He looked at me sideways and smirked. I drove home alone. When you drop a kid off in a new life, you can measure your own by the single song you keep replaying, and the way your hands feel on the steering wheel. My hands felt old and useful. I took breaks at 2 gas stations I'd never stop at otherwise, just to stand in the fluorescent buzz of someone else's quiet. A week into his new job he called me at 9:52 p.m., hands still dirty because he sent me a picture. He had a nick on one knuckle and a grin bigger than the U-Haul ever was. He said, "Carla made me redo a bend 5 times. 5 times. I told her it was within tolerance. She told me tolerance isn't an opinion." He said it like he'd just heard a brand new law of physics. Then, quieter, I unsubscribed from a bunch of people. It felt like taking out the trash. He said he'd booked an appointment with a counselor through his program's employee assistance thing. He said he didn't know what he'd say. I told him he didn't have to know yet. Back home, my wife's thumb healed into a neat little line, and I kept finding excuses to do dishes because I'd started to know the rhythms in a way that wasn't all duty. I liked the hot water at 10 o'clock and the way the kitchen gets so still you can hear the house breathe. My daughter did an open mic night at a coffee shop and read a poem about laundry and love that made me and her mother cry in public and pretend we weren't crying. She called it static cling because she's better at titles than anyone I know. Afterward, we drove home with the windows down, and she said she had decided she was done explaining to boys what basic courtesy means in group chats. I told her I support this policy and also that I hoped boys catch up soon. A small, unexpected thing happened too. My oldest ex sent my wife a text thanking her for checking in, for not prying, for teaching her to make that slop, which she made on a bad day, and it made her feel like winter wasn't winning. She added a PS for me, tell your husband he didn't ruin anything. He handed me a measuring stick I'd never used before, and I realized my life could be different. I did a very undignified sniffle over that message and my wife kissed my cheek in the middle of the grocery store all because we read it between the canned beans and the ridiculous display of popcorn flavors no one asked for. I saw my oldest again last night on a video call. He had paint on the collar of his shirt and there was a plant in the background that he swore he bought on purpose. He told me he's learning from a woman who can eyeball a measurement to within a hair and will roast you if you get precious about it. He said he apologized again to his ex, not to pry open anything, but to put the apology where it belonged, and then he said something that made me pause. He said, I thought respect was a tone of voice. I think it's actually what you do when you don't feel like it. I told him I was stealing that. He said I wouldn't pay royalties. And because life doesn't line anything up neatly, my youngest came bounding into the living room while I was still on the call, holding his phone out like a trophy. He yelled, she did it. She farted. And she didn't even blush. I think I'm in love. Then he remembered his brother was on the screen and turned 12 shades of red. My oldest laughed so hard he had to turn his camera off because he claimed he got something in his eye. My wife, from the kitchen, raised my empty coffee cup and wiggled her fingers over it in the air. Hocus pocus, she said, even though the stitches are long out and the magic cup joke has been through the wash more times than that hoodie. I don't know where any of this goes. I know my oldest isn't fixed, because people aren't toasters. I know my daughter will keep writing and setting the bar stubbornly where she wants it, and I know my youngest will get his heart dented and learn to hammer it back. I know my wife and I will keep trading chores we pretend to own until we're old and our hands are more memory than muscle, and we will still con each other out of making our own coffee. I know I will keep saying sorry, and I will keep trying to hear the parts of conversations that don't flatter me. I know this because a week ago I was hauling a mattress up 3 flights of stairs with my son swearing behind me and Carla calling him a princess to make him move faster, and I remembered that building a life looks stupid to anyone who wasn't invited to carry a corner. This morning I got another text. It was just a photo, my oldest hands around a paper cup with a swirl of foam on top. The barista had drawn a crooked heart like they were learning. The caption said, not magic. Still good. I wrote back, that's the whole trick. He sent me the eye roll emoji I pretend to hate. Then he called me, because we're both trying. Update 3. At 3:11 a.m. last Thursday my phone lit up with a call from my oldest. A call at 3:11 is a category, not a time. I stepped into the hallway so I wouldn't wake my wife and answered to the sound of running water and swearing. He was laughing, which is a flavor of panic I recognize. We're making a pool, he said. He'd discovered a burst pipe in the hall ceiling outside his apartment, the kind of spray you see in cartoons and assume doesn't happen outside of bad hotels. He and a neighbor, kid in flannel pajama pants and Crocs, were holding a baking sheet over their heads like a shield to direct the water into a Rubbermaid bin. He FaceTimed me, braced his phone on a stack of pizza boxes, and I watched him do 3 things I wasn't sure I'd ever see. Call the building emergency number first instead of trying to be the hero, tell the bleary-eyed property manager he needed to shut off water to the stack, and rope in the cranky guy on 2 to help before he could complain his way out of it. Carla's voice in my head, he said later, over the sound of a wet vac. She's got a volume setting named after me. 2 days before that, I broke the magic cup. I didn't mean to. I was unloading the dishwasher, thinking about whether our youngest needed a ride to the theater or had conned a friend into taking him, and I just fumbled. It hit the tile in this doomed wobble and split clean in 2. My wife and I stood over it and said nothing. Then she looked at me and started laughing. The kind of laugh that breaks something else open. Well, she said, now you have to marry me again. We went to a thrift store with shelves of orphan mugs, each one somebody else's morning. We stood there for an hour, telling stories about strangers based on their cookie jar souvenirs and slogans like world's okayest golfer. We didn't find a twin. We found an odd, heavy stoneware cup with a hairline crack already mended in gold. Somebody had done that Japanese repair that turns a flaw into a vein. It was the wrong shape and too heavy. We bought it. We came home and ran it through the dishwasher even though the internet told us not to. It survived. New magic, she said, and wiggled her fingers over it. The coffee didn't taste different, but everything did. On Monday my oldest called after his second therapy appointment and said, she made me draw my brain as a pipe system. He put the drawing up to the camera, marker lines and little arrows and a dramatic danger, pressure scrawled near a blob labeled pride. He told me his therapist asked where he thought he was most likely to burst. Turns out, he said, I keep installing relief valves in other people. It took me a second and then it hit. He was talking about outsourcing accountability. She asked me if I wanted to be a good partner or just be seen as one, he said, and he sat with that until it made him wince. He used the word rehearse about feelings and I nearly drove off the road, because we always like sports metaphors in this family and here he was, doing drills. Work is work even when your brain is a plumbing diagram. He sent me a photo later, a neat run of copper that looked like it had been measured with patience. Underneath it, in black Sharpie, someone had written with intolerance, my dude? And drawn an arrow. Carla, he said. She has terrible handwriting and a better point. He's on a crew with 2 women now, Carla and a new apprentice named Nor who learned to solder before she learned to parallel park because her dad restores old radiators. The first day Nor asked my son to hold a pipe steady and he started to explain his grip like she hadn't been born with thumbs. He told me he felt his mouth doing the thing and he shut it. Do you want a hand? He asked instead, and Nor said, not with that, and then made the cleanest joint in the room. The silence felt like jumping in a cold lake, he said. But I didn't die. The X-surface swell came inside a Tuesday. Social media is a roulette wheel that spins whether you watch or not. My daughter showed my wife a photo of his ex at a fall festival in a sweater the color of cinnamon, standing next to a guy in a college sweatshirt. They looked happy. Word got through the sibling wire in under an hour. My oldest called me from the bus stop with an honesty that made my teeth ache. It sucks, he said, like he was quoting scripture, and then, I'm not going to call her. I said I was proud of him for not doing the thing that would make him feel better for 5 minutes and worse for a year. I walked past the whole aisle of stupid cereal just to feel stronger than something, he told me later, and if you've never been 23 in a grocery store, that sentence will sound ridiculous. If you have, you know exactly which aisle he means. There was a day in there, one of those weak-kneed days that nothing special happens, when the thing that did happen felt like a needle moving. I was in line at the hardware store with a basket full of picture hooks and exactly 1 bag of those tiny felt dots you put under chair legs because I'm becoming the man I made fun of at 20. The man in front of me had a little girl in a dinosaur hoodie, and the hoodie's tail kept whacking him in the shins. He kept flinching and then smiling at her. He was buying caulk and a plant mister. My phone buzzed and it was my oldest, a picture of a bent scrap he'd turned into a sort of heart shape, half accidental, half deliberate. It only looks right from one angle, he wrote. I texted back, that's all angles. He sent me a photo 2 hours later of the same scrap on his kitchen windowsill, a little crooked heart catching the last light. He said, Carla said it's not a waste if you learned where not to pry. Our youngest had his first real fight with his girlfriend. It was not a big deal and it was the size of a house. He made a joke in a group chat and didn't notice he'd stepped on a soft spot. He came home with that terrible brittle look in his eyes, like Elijah Wood grain cracking. He paced and said, I said sorry and she said, thanks, but I need space, and then I said okay and then I typed a paragraph I didn't send. He wanted me to tell him whether he should send it. I told him to try reading it out loud to the dog. He read it to the dog and then said, I hear it. It's me explaining me. Not me hearing her. He sent one sentence instead, I hear you. I'm here when you want. 2 days later she came over wearing a hoodie that did not belong to us and sat at our kitchen table and ate a bowl of the forbidden slop and said, sometimes I have bad days that make me think none of my jokes are funny and I get mean in my head. He nodded, and then he asked if she wanted a hug, which is such a small sentence that sometimes parole officers make it into bumper stickers. They hug like kids do, fast and awkward and sincere enough to make me check the smoke detector because there was heat in the room. My daughter is a meteor with a notebook. She hosted a reading at the coffee shop, the same one where the barista can't draw a heart so it looks like a potato and somehow that's better. She wore a jacket she stole from me 12 years ago and introduced everyone else like she was giving away prizes. She read a new one about ironing, about pressing a seam flat so you can sew a clean line, about choosing the temperature that won't scorch. She said, I want a love that reads the care tag, and 3 tables clapped at exactly the same time. After, a guy with a podcast haircut tried to debate metaphors with her. She smiled and said, you're allowed to leave them in the basket if they don't fit you. And when he opened his mouth again she turned to the next person and asked about their poem. Watching her do boundaries in public felt like learning to breathe through my nose. There's a thread running through all this that pulls me back to my dad. He called and said, your mother bought a recliner, which means everything in the house must move 3 inches to the left, including me. He asked if I could come over Saturday and help him pretend he knew where the studs are. I asked my oldest if he wanted to meet me there because we'd been stealing minutes in grout lines and truck beds lately, and he said yes in that easy way I forgot to hope for. We spent the morning moving furniture and not a single perfect noun was required. My dad told the fart advice story the way he always tells it. The first time my mom did it in front of him, she was in his car, and he rolled the windows down and yelled my future wife. At a passing cornfield. My wife has heard this story 100 times and laughed like it was a new joke. My oldest asked him how long it took to figure things out. My dad said, a year and then the rest of your life, and then he put a nail in the wall at exactly the right height without measuring because he's that kind of witch. If you're waiting for the crazy, maybe it's this. Carla came to dinner. She was in town for a supplier meeting and my son asked if it would be weird and I said yes and also come anyway. She stood in my kitchen and held our new heavy mug and asked who did the gold line. My wife told her the story, and Carla said, "We have a saying at the shop, if it breaks where you bend it too fast," and then she laughed at herself, like she knew she sounded like a fortune cookie written by a mechanic. She talked to my daughter about unions and about how people will tell you you're not allowed at tables you built yourself. She asked my youngest about the thumb stitches story and he mortified himself recounting his girlfriend's official entry into the Hall of Comfort. Then she looked at me and said, "You did the dishes wrong," and I grinned, because praise is nice, but teasing is family. She meant the way I stack the bowls, not the content of my character, but still, the hierarchy of criticism matters. He is not a miracle, my oldest. He is an apprentice taking too long on a task he'll one day do by muscle memory. He sent me a voice memo where he used the phrase "I got defensive in my head and then I moved my mouth anyway," and I wanted to press a button that forwards that sentence to every man at the moment of their birth. He told me about a coworker telling a lazy joke and how the silence that followed was longer this week than it would have been last month, and how he was part of holding it. He said it felt like holding a door. He said it felt like waiting for your own better self to arrive. I don't want to make him a saint because saints are terrible at taking out the trash. He forgot to eat lunch one day and called me at 4 p.m. shaking, and I door-dashed him a sandwich like a helicopter parent with a credit card. He thanked me and then said, "I'm going to set reminders," which is the adult version of me putting grapes in his lunchbox. He did one thing that I keep circling back to. He mailed us a package. Inside was a little piece of copper bent into a heart, polished just enough to be warm in your hand, mounted on a square of scrap wood sanded soft. On the back he wrote in pencil, "Tolerance is not an opinion. But it's also not the point." I put it on the shelf by the photos of first days and last games and that one blurry picture where my wife is mid-laugh, eyes closed, hand up like she was trying to catch a moment and keep it. The copper heart catches the afternoon sun and throws a line of light across the room in a way that makes even the dust look intentional. As for the ex, we saw her once, by accident. My wife and I were at the farmer's market, and there she was at a table buying apples, the kind of apples that make you remember what grocery store apples are missing. She saw us, and there was that half second where all the versions of possible reactions jostled for position. She picked kind. She hugged my wife and waved at me and asked if our youngest was still cooking himself into a job he didn't want. We talked about nothing in a way that meant everything. When she left she squeezed my wife's hand. On the way to the car, my wife said, "I'm proud of her," and I realized pride isn't proprietary. On the drive home I told my son we'd seen her. He said, "I hope she likes her apples, and if you don't hear the work inside that sentence, I don't know how to teach you." The youngest decided he wanted to learn to make pour-over coffee because he saw a video of a guy swirling a kettle like he was conducting an orchestra. I let him take over the kitchen one Saturday morning while my wife and I sat like judges at the world's gentlest competition. He had a scale and a notebook and wrote down numbers like he was cataloging butterflies. He handed us cups and waited for our faces, and my wife took a sip and did her fake snooty voice, hints of desperation and notes of triumph. He bowed. The cup was good. Not magic. Still good. I texted a picture to my oldest and he sent back a photo of his own cup, a travel mug with a dent big as a thumbprint, resting on a coil of extension cord. On break, he wrote. He sent another text a minute later. I told Noor she was right without adding but. I think my therapist would give me a sticker. I told him I'd give him two. Last thing, and then I'll let the thread rest until something else catches fire or catches light. On Sunday night, when the house had that hum it gets, my daughter sprawled on the couch and read out loud an email she'd gotten from a local college about a writing scholarship. She kept skipping sentences like she didn't want to name them yet. My youngest was on the floor measuring coffee beans like a pharmacist. My wife was in my t-shirt, leaning against the counter, waiting for me to hand her a cup I'd poured with more care than some people take with proposals. My phone buzzed, and I looked down and saw a photo from my oldest, his hand and Carla's hand both pointing at a drawing on a clipboard, his knuckles still nicked, her nail polish chipped, two hands mid-argument and mid-agreement. The caption, "It'll hold." That's it. No fireworks. No neat bow, just a promise between a pipe and the water it will carry, between people and the lives they're building, between the quiet minutes and the loud ones. I poured my wife's coffee into the heavy cup with the gold scar. She pretended to cast a spell and I pretended to not be charmed. The new cup doesn't ring like the old one when it hits the counter, it makes a deeper sound. That's okay. Things change their sound when you fix them. We're drinking anyway. We're learning the tune.